There are parents who treat the household like a border checkpoint, where an item out of place becomes a national crisis, and spilled glass turns into a high-volume TED Talk on your incompetence. Children raised in such atmospheres develop a nervous rhythm, a hyper-attunement to tone, footsteps, the direction of a sigh. They become translators of micro-expressions, experts in predicting storms. Their nervous systems become meteorologists of mood. Psychologically, the child in such a family becomes a living buffer. The nervous system is recruited into the couple's relationship as a stabilizing device, like a tiny emotional Switzerland trying to negotiate peace treaties during breakfast. Children scan which parent is closer to emotional collapse and subconsciously offer themselves to absorb the impact. This is called role reversal. The child becomes the implicit parent of the unstable adults. They scream at each other and other times they scream at you. Both scenarios are terrifying. People assume shouting comes from anger, but it often comes from panic. The panic of adults who never felt in control of their own lives. So they tower over tiny humans to finally feel like someone who matters. Imagine their interior world, a cramped room full of rules no one explained, where they were graded on obedience. So they passed the tradition down like a cursed family heirloom. Parenting became the reenactment of their earliest captivity. Only now they held the keys. A controlling parent is merely a once controlled child who never experienced a world that waited for them to speak. Inside such a home, the emotional environment does not reset when the screaming stops. The silence afterward often hurts more, becoming a charged atmosphere where every sound feels like a potential detonator. The child learns to calculate risk in real time, deciphering footsteps, analyzing the tempo of breathing in the next room, adjusting their voice to avoid triggering another explosion. This is not a childhood. It is a career in crisis management, beginning long before the brain has the tools to understand what it is protecting itself from. Psychologically, the central wound for the kid raised in such a home is inconsistency. A caregiver who can oscillate between affectionate and terrifying teaches a child that connection is unstable and the self is unsafe. The nervous system becomes conditioned to anticipate the next shock, even during calm moments. The child's developing identity bends itself around someone else's emotional weather, until the idea of having needs or opinions feels dangerous. Some children go invisible to minimize threat, shrinking their personality into the smallest possible target. Others become outwardly defiant, unconsciously reenacting the chaos in an attempt to gain control over it. Both responses come from the same place, trying to survive a love that feels weaponized. This atmosphere also alters the child's internal narrative. Instead of thinking, "My parent has poor emotional regulation," the developing mind concludes, "I must be so wrong, so disappointing, so inherently faulty that even my existence provokes rage." Shame becomes the operating system. The child might grow into a high-functioning adult who succeeds academically or professionally, yet still carries a hidden suspicion that they are permanently flawed. Accomplishments briefly soothe the old terror, but never silence it. Parents who yell at each other are often people who never learned the native language of emotional regulation. Anger is the only vocabulary word they retained from their own upbringing. So their communication style becomes competitive loudness. Whoever ruptures the air harder believes they have won the argument. Volume becomes currency. Silence becomes defeat. In high conflict homes, love is measured by who you align with during the screaming. There is no safe neutrality. Being Switzerland gets you invaded by both sides, so the child learns to micro-pivot identity, one version of themselves to soothe one parent, another version to soothe the other. This splits their sense of self into masks optimized for danger reduction. Another deep observation is that screaming parents aren't really fighting about the thing they're screaming about. They're battling their own old injuries projected onto whichever adult stands nearby. A forgotten dish becomes, "You never respect me." A misplaced sock becomes, "You are exactly like my father." The argument is a time machine, dragging two wounded kids into the present and forcing the actual kid in the room to watch. Interpersonally, this creates a devastating side effect. Self-protection gets in the way of intimacy. If the people meant to nurture you also frightened you, closeness becomes coded as vulnerability, and vulnerability as danger. Many adults from these homes pursue relationships where they feel responsible for the other person's emotional stability. They reenact the early role of managing chaos. Others avoid deep bonds entirely, sensing that commitment might trap them again in an environment where someone else dictates their emotional safety. Even when no new shouting happens, the nervous system remembers. It reacts to raised voices in a meeting, a lover's frustrated tone, a stranger's irritation, as if the original danger has returned. It is not an overreaction, but an adaptation to a history where danger came disguised as home. Another overlooked consequence lies in language development. Kids learn how humans communicate by observing tone, rhythm, pacing. When all conversations escalate, language becomes fused with hostility. Many adults from such homes later struggle with expressing needs calmly. They cycle between silence and explosion because they were never shown the middle ground. Emotional vocabulary that remains underdeveloped. Every complex feeling gets mislabeled as anger or nothing. There is also the problem of identity distortion. The child becomes whatever version of themselves reduces the likelihood of being shouted at. They modify interests, posture, eating habits, even body language to take up less psychological space. Their personality becomes a product of threat evasion, not self-discovery. Later, they may not know what they genuinely enjoy, only what keeps others calm. Screaming parents also create epistemic distrust, doubt in one's own interpretation of reality. A child cries because they're afraid. The parent yells, "Stop being dramatic." The feeling is denied, the perception punished. Over time, the internal compass demagnetizes. Adults raised like this struggle to trust their own reactions, a shaky foundation for autonomy. Then there's the moral confusion. Children imitate authority, and their first model of moral behavior is whoever feeds them. When the caregiver's ethics include intimidation, humiliation, or dominance, the child receives a contradictory lesson. Harm is wrong unless you are the one in charge. Some adopt that rule and replicate it outward. Others reject all authority and struggle to assert boundaries because they associate power exclusively with brutality. Another consequence is something from a bad acid trip. It's called internalized surveillance. Even in rooms where no one is angry, the child-turned-adult continues monitoring themselves as if a hidden judge lurks nearby. They edit their sentences mid-thought. They watch their own posture. They apologize preemptively. They conduct themselves as though an explosion is always one misstep away. But perhaps the most complex scary legacy is how shouting disrupts the child's ability to form an inner sanctuary. When the threat is apparent, someone who lives inside the same walls, the brain learns that no space is truly safe. Many adults raised like this cannot relax even when alone, because safety was never tied to solitude. Danger lived 3 rooms away and could enter without warning. This is how trauma bonding is created. The child learns that the same person who terrifies them is also the one who provides comfort after the terror. Their nervous system becomes fluent in contradiction. Danger and attachment fused into a single experience. That confusion hardens into adulthood, where a calm partner feels suspicious and chaotic relationships feel like home. Those kids often grow into extremely competent adults, the kind of people who can sense tension 3 planets away and diffuse it with a joke or a strategic exit. They excel in crisis because crisis was their kindergarten curriculum. They know how to scan the architecture of power in any room and see where emotional collapse will occur first. Childhood fear becomes a sharpened perceptual tool, a dark superpower formed under cruel apprenticeships. And the parents? They age into softer creatures sometimes. Their yelling becomes an artifact even they find embarrassing. Strangely, some even envy their children for growing into adults who refuse to repeat the same barbaric strategies.